I'm Sarah Orton-Vipond. I'm the Director of Engagement and Partnerships at Development Gateway, also a member of Open Heroines and have been for years now, and part of the Open Heroines core team.
My name is Hazwany Jamaluddin, and what I'm doing is that I'm a specialist for media and information literacy for social enterprise that focuses on education for young people in Malaysia.
I'm Juliana Carvalho. I'm currently a PhD candidate in transport systems based in Porto, Portugal, and I'm originally from Brazil.
My name is Steele, and I'm the community manager of the Turing Way project, which is based at the Alan Turing Institute, the UK's National Centre for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence.
I would say that the best example that I can give about this was from a very close friend that applied for a sort of consultancy job. And it was a process that everyone should send in their curriculum, and then they would, in base of the pool of candidates, gather up some teams for certain territories. And she was selected to be one of those teams, but then she realized that the person who was selected to be team leader and would get a much higher pay at the end of the month actually did not have the best curricula to be there. So the team was about 4 guys, her and another guy, and the guy that was leading was not the best person to be leading, not only in her eyes, but in the other team members as well.
So thinking back on my career, I mean, I've been at Development Gateway for 8 years now. So my career before Development Gateway was quite short. But I think about the time that I was hired. The organization I worked with before DG was a really small nonprofit. And I was not making a lot of money, like barely enough to pay my student loans. And I came to DG, I had calculated all of like what an increase would be, what I could actually survive living in DC on, and I asked for it. And the CEO at the time, Jean-Louis Sarbib, said that's too low and increased my ask by, I think it was like 15,000 or something. And I realized then that without him, I would have been starting from a much lower standpoint, and that would affect where I am today as well. And most people don't have Jean Louise. And especially most women don't have people looking out for them for how much they're receiving when they're 23 years old. So I just realized very young that like it starts early, that women ask for less. And the information just wasn't out there for how much to ask. You can go to Glassdoor and look, but you're not really gonna know what to ask for in your position.
I feel like it's very discriminatory when it comes to there's no transparency in terms of for the company of what the company offered for potential candidates to the position. It has been going on for a very, very long time. It's not just in the non-profit sector. Somehow I recognize a pattern when I try to go out from the non-profit sector to a private sector. So it's a similar kind of pattern. It's just the difference is the higher and the more renowned an organization, a company is, then the less likely they would hire, because they have credential, they have prestige, so they have a certain standards that they need to adhere. Then they may use like a third party white collar employment agency to disclose how much the salary amount and the benefits are for that position. But it varies because that's only applies for a big organization, more established one. But it doesn't apply for a social enterprise or a very small organization, small, medium enterprise. It's not like it's like a standardized kind of practice whereby all, regardless of what company, non-profit or private sector, that they should publish the pay.
We think this really plays into existing power dynamics within teams. We think this really plays an additional complication or role across geographies, and ultimately leads to informational asymmetry.
I think that gender pay discrimination impacts our careers because it prevents us from advancing at the same pace or at the same value that our skills have. So sometimes not being paid well enough will be a barrier to get to the places that we could and exploit our full potential as professionals. And I think that the pay differences a lot of the times reflect prejudices about gender roles, traditional gender roles, that women might take a maternity leave that is longer. They might have too many responsibilities with their kids and family members, so they might miss work more. So they are seen as someone who has other commitments that are maybe not as focused on the job, and therefore this justifies this unequal pay. And at the end of the day, this is quite unfair and prevents us from reaching our potential in the fields we choose to be in.
We think this really plays into existing power dynamics within teams. We think this really plays an additional complication or role across geographies, and ultimately leads to informational asymmetry. Friends, colleagues, my coworkers, we had a kind of small discussion together about what pay gaps or pay transparency, the relationship between pay gaps and pay transparency. And we really found that for many folks, it determined whether or not they either applied to or accepted a role. And if they didn't see that information available on a job posting, they would do everything that they could to find it through other means, whether through online postings, forums, etc. And so it's really become something that I think our team has held really close, the importance of being open at every step, not only as a project, but also on an institutional level as well. Having explicit information available over assumed information that comes from informal networks does a lot to combat entrenched biases or the gender pay gap, because salary transparency doesn't necessarily help with salary negotiation. So having explicit policies surrounding what is available online, I think really helps to set an equal playing field for folks, especially for women that aren't, I think, socialized to think about salary negotiation, aren't necessarily socialized to think about their worth in terms of pay, are socialized to think that they might be asking for too much, or being okay with too little. Again, it's something that really, aims to address those issues at the root, but is really only the first step in actual gender equity within especially technical fields like data science and artificial intelligence.
We reach a phase where there's a high cost of living. So when a company or organization that is hiring workers, they need to pay these workers to do the work. Different countries have different kind of way to perform for the economy. That means if there's no benchmark for each country of how much personnel for a position pay, then how does this person needs to survive on the daily basis with the high cost of living?
I think that if you are applying to something, you sort of have an expectation that it will be worth your while in a sense, because applying for a job does take a lot of time out of us, right? You have to think about revising how you present yourself, preparing a letter of motivation, for instance, preparing for an interview. So if you go through all those steps, and at the end of the day is not a good pay. You might not want it, and you might have taken a different direction regarding your time and dedication and try to apply for another job. So I do think that pay transparency would level more the field on how to prioritize our time. And I think this is for everyone in adult life. We lack time to do everything that we want and need.
I think that we've seen organizations invest a lot in diversity and inclusion. There's been a lot of talk around it. And for me, this is it's not easy. I don't want to say it's easy, but this is a straightforward way that we've seen that organizations can do this, right? Like, this is something that is there's growing evidence around it, and you can make progressive policy choices in your company, in your organization, in order to close the gender gap. So why not at this point? So we've shared a few times, like, people have asked for advice if they're spinning out into their own consultancy, or like what their rates should be. And so there is information within the community on salaries, on expectations, on kind of like how to make those requests. What I would like to see as a community is that we continue to push our own organizations for this information, because we do have a diverse community. And again, I know that I'm speaking from I'm a white American woman working at an INGO that is based in Washington, D.C. Like, there's a lot of levels of privilege there, but these organizations, INGOs, are also doing the hiring globally. So there's a way to bridge that gap globally as well, by making these smaller pushes within the community outwards.
Something needs to start somewhere, and it needs to be documented.